always find yourself a friend. Lay down your defenses and fears. You're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson. I'm really excited to welcome you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. So I'm a civil human servant. And really what that means is that I'm focusing my work on building human peace and common ground. And so it's in that effort that I'm looking at my own spiritual foundation and my own spiritual heritage, and especially the teachings of Jesus, to try to find those teachings that I feel are applicable across the board to all people, regardless of our different faith, our different politics, and our different lifestyles. Today we're talking about the end of Jesus' story. So this is when he's being turned over to the religious leaders of the day who are going to put him to death. Today we're looking at the denial of Peter. I'm going to take away some really important morsels, I believe is the word, some choice principles that I think will really help us understand how to deal with people who have turned their backs on what they maybe have stated or claimed that they wanted to believe or stand for. So let's go ahead and jump into the passage. It's Matthew chapter 26, verses 57 through 69. Starting with verse 69. Now Peter sat outside of the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him saying, "You also were with Jesus of Galilee." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you are saying." And when he had gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, "This fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth." But again he denied with an oath, "I do not know the man." And after a while, those who stood by came to him and said to Peter, "Surely you are also one of them, because your speech betrays you." Then he began to curse and swear, saying, "I do not know the man." And immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the words of Jesus, who had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Then he went out and wept bitterly. This is such an important passage to look at, and such an important principle, especially in our modern age and right now in times of a very difficult social upheaval. This principle of looking at our human nature and how we deal with the threat of not belonging and the threat of our life and our safety, and how that affects even the most bravest of people who will in fact end up turning their backs sometimes on some of the most important things that they have stood for. And how do we deal with that? And that's what I want to look at is what happens, why does it happen, and how can we move forward with these types of people in our lives? Can they be used and equipped to become better after? So let's walk through the passage a little bit. I want to set it up. This is Jesus' time where he is being brought before basically a trial, right? This is Jesus before the religious leaders of his day. They are putting him on trial in this very private and very unofficial way, and yet they're putting him to death as a result of it. This is set in the palace of Caiaphas. So Caiaphas is the high priest, who's like the supreme court of the day. He is the guy who is in charge of all the religious aspects. He's in charge of all of the justice, really. The challenge is, though, that Caiaphas was appointed by the Romans, because the Romans, who are in control right now, like to make sure that they are in control, not only of the political aspects, but also the religious aspects of the people that they control. So they appointed Caiaphas, who is this high priest, who is now trying to get rid of Jesus. Why? Why are they trying to get rid of Jesus? Because Jesus is upsetting the system. Because Jesus is pointing out that this massive system with people who are in positions of privilege are living off of the income and the backs and the offerings of the poor and the suffering. And they are not doing a thing to help these people. And so Jesus was very much uncovering the reality of their laziness, their greed, their selfishness, and their hypocrisy in front of all the people. And that was turning the people against the religious leaders of the day. So you can imagine this was a stressful event for them. And so they were looking for any opportunity to kill Jesus. And so this is where they went. And we just talked this last study about the fact that they brought these charges against Jesus, which were false. But then they brought finally Jesus to say something that was considered blasphemy. In other words, they used this really specific law to entrap Jesus, to ignore all of the wonderful things that he had done, to ignore how important and a good person he was, and brought him to death charges because really of a simple law that was being misapplied. So now we have Peter. Peter is the only student that we see in this story who actually follows Jesus to the court, who actually follows Jesus to this palace where Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin and all the religious leaders are gathered to condemn Jesus. And Peter's kind of sitting back in the sides. It says he came up close behind and came as far as the outer courts. So this is a religious leader's house, much like many of our mega pastors these days. He had a huge house with a lot of luxurious living. And so he had a number of courts and a number of servants. And so basically, Peter is trying to hide amidst the servants to make sure that he can see what's going on because, he loves Jesus. And in fact, just, a few hours before, Jesus tells me, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter said, absolutely not. I will give my life before I do that. And so now we have Peter hanging on by a thread, listening to the religious leaders condemn Jesus. This is the moment that we get a very human insight into Peter, and where we are drawn into the part of the story that I feel demonstrates true humanity and the disappointment, if you will, of those that we put our trust in to help us or to stand by us. Peter is asked by one of the servant girls, hey, weren't you with Jesus in Galilee? And he goes, oh, no, absolutely not. No, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he moves a little further back and says and another servant comes up to him and says, hey, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're with Jesus, this guy that just got, condemned to death, which, in other words, they're saying that, aren't you supposed to be up there as well, being condemned to death? Of course, Peter denies absolutely that he had anything to do with Jesus. And then we get this last time where he's basically almost out the door, but then a group of servants basically surround him and say, yeah, your accent is giving you away. You belong to Jesus. And Peter, it says, called down curses basically upon himself and swore that he was not a part of Jesus's ministry. Not only is it absurd that he would call down all of these curses on himself and to swear, that actually goes against one of the heart of the teachings that Jesus taught him, and that is to let your yes be yes and your no be no. But clearly, he's scared and he's terrified because he doesn't want to lose his life. And then a rooster crows, which means, obviously the sun is coming up, so it's the next day. And Peter remembers that Jesus said and suggested that he was going to deny him 3 times before the rooster crowed the next day. And so it's exactly what happened. And then we have Peter weeping bitterly. I love that the author Matthew chose to use that adjective or descriptor, that he wept bitterly. It's been my experience that when I've observed individuals who have come to terms with their poor decisions, or come to terms with the fact that they weren't strong enough to stand against the peer pressure and to stand against the threat against their life, it is a very difficult and very painful place to be in. Number one, we're angry at ourselves when we do that. because we wish that we could be stronger. 2, we're scared. We're terrified that we're going to lose our life. And so we're confused about that reality. And 3, we're humiliated because we know that we told everybody that we weren't going to do it, and now we just did what we said we weren't going to do. I want to talk about this specific situation and ask a question: what does this have to do with us today? What does this have to do with us 2,000 years removed, and just as human beings? Maybe not Christians, maybe not people of faith. Does it have any application to us right here and now? I really believe it does. And here's how I want to apply that. Right now, I'm going to speak to American elections. And although this conversation really extends across the globe right now, there's a great deal of division. And it is the nature of politics that we use wedge issues, which are issues that are highly debatable and that have some gray area and that are hard to nail down, but they are emotive and they cost people their reputation. And those oftentimes are strategy for political persons to use to separate crowds. Because in politics, you don't want people not sure what they're going to do. You want a wedge issue which causes them to identify with the group completely so that they are locked into this group and unable to cross over to the other group. Because it's so controversial that if they leave, everyone's going to be upset at them. This is a pretty common strategy that has worked very well in politics. Obviously, those of you who know me, I worked in politics for about 8 years as a consultant, so I'm very familiar with this strategy. And it will always be used in politics. It's just the nature of that particular game, if you will. But these days, that division has found itself in a greater way than we have ever seen, I believe. The advent of social media, the ability for us to separate ourselves from everybody else, to participate in a group in such a way that we alienate every other voice and every other context and are able to live in a bubble of yeses and acceptance. And when we are caused to question ourselves today, it means leaving the bubble. And that means leaving our friends. Sometimes it means leaving our family. Sometimes it means leaving our community and our church. Sometimes it means leaving the people that we have loved for so long, but because they have stood for something that we disagree with, we have to leave. But I want to talk about right now, in this context, what do we do with the individuals who we love, who have been a part of our lives, who end up denying us, who end up separating from us for political reasons? I know I myself have had family and friends who have had to separate themselves from me, even though publicly I am apolitical, which means that I do not endorse a candidate for office. I have not, and I will not. That's one important part of my message in building peace and common ground. It's something that I have to give up in order to be able to talk to everybody. But I have witnessed individuals separate themselves from me because of that very conversation, because I'm unwilling to side with them and participate in their group. And then I've watched individuals who have stood for certain principles completely stand in absolute antithesis, an absolute about face from where they're at. And right now, some of them are coming to terms with that. Some of them are coming to terms with what they have done, with the extremeness of their denial, with their separation from the things that they knew were wrong, but they ignored. How do we deal with those people? Do we never get together with them again? Do we alienate them and say, you know what, you chose your group, you chose which direction to go, good luck, I don't want to talk to you again? There are many of us who have done that. I want to encourage us today to consider a different option, though. I want to encourage us to consider resolution. reconciliation, forgiveness. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that word right now because there are many people who have said and done things that are atrocious and offensive, even our loved ones, to us. But I want to suggest this to you because there's a different outcome that happens as a result of that. Having mercy as opposed to justice yields a stronger fruit. And I want to take the example of Peter right here, in this example of him denying what he knew to be right, what he had given his entire life for, which he had convinced himself that he was going to give his life for. But when it came down to it, when the rubber hit the road and the moment came, he folded. He denied and cursed himself, swearing that he had nothing to do with Jesus. It would be easy to dismiss Peter and to remove him from ever being part of a group moving forward. But we'd miss out. Because by forgiving him and by giving him the ability to become better than who he was before, Peter became one of the most significant movers and shakers in the first century in the development of Christianity's early days. Peter led the early church to be strong, to have individuals go out of their way to share a message of good living, a message of mercy and forgiveness and love for our neighbors. That message is something that Peter later ends up giving his life for. When the moment came later, he was able to be a better person. I want to just maybe encourage you. I know I've had to think a lot about this right now because I have been personally hurt by individuals who have called me out and denied me and any belonging or affiliation to me. And I know you have had that happen too. It would be easy for us to allow the anger and the frustration to be poured out on them, to be vindictive, and to say, look, I told you so. I told you so, you were wrong. And they may know it. But if we want to live in a society that is peaceful, a society that is beneficial for all of us, we can't do that. Because when we do that, all we do is create a division that was already put there by our enemy. They pushed our loved ones into a place where they separated from us. And we, by doing that, by not forgiving them, are allowing them to win. When we look at those people who have hurt us, who know that they have done something wrong, when we come to them and we welcome them back and say, I understand. I get it. You are human. It was too much for you. It was too much for you to stand out on your own. I understand. And give them the opportunity to become better. When we allow people second, third, fourth, fifth chances, we give them the opportunity, just like we give ourselves, to become better people, to become stronger people, and to contribute back to our society. I appreciate you giving me your time this morning, and might just encourage you to spend some time thinking about those people who have hurt you, those people who have denied you or separated themselves from you. I might encourage you that rather than allowing bitterness and anger to continue in your heart and in theirs, to consider a path of reconciliation, to forgive them, to let it go, to release them from that bitterness, because you're releasing yourself from it as well. And instead to love them and to welcome them back and to help them learn from what they've done. I would love it if you would contribute your thoughts, your reflections on this very thing. If you have stories that, confirm this idea or disagree with it, I would love it as well. It helps me to learn. It helps us all to learn. And you are the only person in this universe that can think the way that you do. And so I would love to encourage you also. If you're on Facebook, please like my page so we can stay in contact with one another there. If you're on YouTube, there's a little button right down here that you can click that says subscribe. Would love it if you would do so we can stay in contact with one another. And until tomorrow, when we meet again, I want you to know that I love you. And I do hope that you choose to love yourself. It's the only love in this world that we have any control over. And now I would invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving those around us the same way. Thank you.